Good evening. Welcome to Community Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources that we hope to help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid, here with my co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello. Do you want to talk to the satellite?
Yeah, what's going on?
Uh, Before the show airs next week, but after we're taping it, Elon Musk and Mike Sievert, the CEO of T-Mobile, are doing a press conference, almost surely announcing that you're going to be able to use Musk's satellites with T-Mobile phones.
Hmm.
And the question is, what? This is something that's this is something that the industry's been building up to for several years. And there's even something in the standard, in fact, a lot in the standard at 3GPP for cell phones, 5G, that includes satellite. Because, of course, satellite, you have really good line of sight on. You don't have any problem with buildings. Well, you could get buildings in the way if you're quite close, but generally, this satellite can see you anywhere. In particular, the extreme part of Alaska, the places in Vermont where your cell phone doesn't work, and so on. It's probably going to be expensive, and it's actually a quite amazing achievement. It's been pretty amazing that cell phones can talk with no trouble and no interruption when you're in a car driving 60 miles an hour, and some of the latest stuff can work in a train at 200 miles an hour.
Hmm.
But I don't know how many thousands of miles an hour those satellites are running at. And keeping that in focus and shifting from one satellite to the next when it comes out of range is a tough problem that apparently they think they've solved.
So, Dave, break it down for me. What do you think that they are proposing doing? Doing phone calls on the satellite system, or what? Break it
If
down.
I was if I was in Vermont where I couldn't get a signal, which I've been, I could use the satellites. I don't know how expensive it'll
So
be.
your cell service, not just internet service.
For your cell service and presumably internet service, you can do voice over internet, remember? I'm
Yes,
doing that right now. We're on Zoom.
right.
So voice is just an app, as Jeff Pulver used to say, a dozen times a speech.
Mm-hmm.
And voice goes just fine. Now, another remarkable thing is AI. I didn't like that fellow with the ring in his nose, and he just
Yeah, I mean,
lost his recording contract.
yeah, this was something that was totally news to me that I ran across on BBC News feed. Apparently, there is an AI rapper, and he goes by the name FN Meka MEKA, and he's in the headlines now because he just got dropped by Capitol Records. And apparently, this particular AI musician is what he's called. He's given the appearance of a black male cyborg, and he raps. And apparently, based on interview of some of the people behind it, um, there's an actual human voice that performs the vocals. Although they're working on making that an AI voice as well, but right now, the human voice, but it's an AI figure that does, I guess, all of the other movements and presumably maybe the music as well that goes with it. They have roughly 500,000 subscribers on Spotify. But there's been a lot of criticism. The industry group, activist group, Industry Blackout, sent an open letter to calling FN Meka offensive. And they said, I'm quoting now, that it's an amalgamation of gross stereotypes, appropriate mannerisms that derive from Black artists, complete with slurs infused with lyrics. And apparently this cyborg, if you will, FN Meka, just released a song, a duo, with the rapper Gunna. who was apparently up on criminal charges related to lyrics and social media postings that he's made. And one of the complaints of industry blackout, the advocacy group, is that while the rapper Gunna was going to be brought up on charges, no such action can be taken against the cyborg. They call it a digital effigy that is a careless abomination and disrespectful to real people who face real consequences in real life. I haven't seen this. I'm going to go take a look at it as soon as I get a chance to. FN Meka, Meka. It's got I'm looking at a photograph of him. It's really weird. He's got a brass jaw and looks like gold teeth and a nose ring and green braids in his hair and green eyes. Very unusual looking visage, if you will. But the whole notion that you can create music using AI, create a whole character using AI, and have an AI musician that's signed on Spotify, 500,000 users. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling, Dave. Kind of AI seems to be moving into a whole nother level of sophistication.
Which is what we're going to be talking about next. Some of the remarkable achievements of AI and some of the problems it makes.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely possible for a machine to write music and write music that's close enough that it probably could go commercial. I haven't seen that happen, but a writer at the New York Times did his last column, not his last column, an earlier column by computer. He fed in to a program, the GPT-3, a sentence or two of the substance of the article and told the computer, try writing it. And he told his editors that that's what he had done. So they knew it was computer generated, but he thought it was so strong that they wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't told them. And they're just getting started with this stuff the last 10 years. What's his name? The CEO of Google realized about 4 years ago. The AI had made it possible for the Google translation to be remarkably good. Same on the voice recognition, much better, and actually the search. And at that point, he's consciously realigned the whole company so that just about every project would use AI to be developed because he was seeing it was working that well. There were lots of parlor tricks along the way. It played chess and it even played Go, which was a harder problem. But that's nothing compared to what the latest thing from Google's DeepMind, has done. They took the enormous database of 200 million proteins that have been discovered by science over the last 150 years and mapped every one of them in 3D. It's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
They've compared the maps against some of the stuff that had been made in the labs, where it could take 3 months or 3 years to do the complete structure of a protein. But it was close enough to be useful. That was science achievement of the year, and it may be science achievement of the century when you think about it. And it's going to be, I don't know whether they can get it to work immediately, but that definitely is going to make a difference in drug discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't do this because we're on the radio and we don't have that many people watching us. But the article by Kevin Rouse begins with some artwork he arranged by sending it over to DALL-E, which takes a phrase and generates related art.
Now, Dave, this is some software, DALL-E, DALLE, right?
Yep. You remember like WALL-E the movie and DALL-E, the artist who had the clocks that would melt and
Salvador
so on?
Dali.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he typed in a sailboat knitted out of bouillard, and the picture is there. Looks fine. At the top of the article is one that he's put on with an abstract, wanting to get an image of happiness. And it's a very bright, attractive, semi-abstract illustration.
So, Dave, let me just get it straight if I hear you right. What this software, this AI software does, you speak into it and say a phrase or something that you wanted to render, and on its own, it comes up with the image that matches or to some degree is characteristic of what you just spoke. Is that right?
Well, and you can see it in the New York Times, what happened with the phrase black and white vintage photograph of a 1920s mobster taking a selfie. And what you saw was a guy in a bowler hat who looked like a mobster with his arm out, taking a selfie. And it was remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
You can also put a charcoal sketch of two penguins drinking wine in a Parisian bistro. Mm-hmm. Now, there are very few penguins who live in Paris regularly, so they're obviously tourists. Which means they're probably
this is it's amazing, Dave. I mean, I you know how this stuff works is like kind of mind-boggling. I looked at the story that you're describing, and one of the things that they said, maybe you can kind of break this down for us, is they said it doesn't use any templates, any images already preloaded. It starts from scratch with pixels and uses some process called diffusion. And I mean, what is that? What are they? How does this thing work?
Okay, I don't know the technicalities of diffusion, but I can tell you in general what's going on here and how they did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a piece of software. It's 10,000 computers temporarily being accessed in a group, i.e. a remarkable supercomputer that's really just a fraction of the capacity of a data center. So it cost $300 and $1,000 worth of computer time to do some of these things.
Okay, you're not doing this at home on your PC.
You can do it at home as long as you're linked up to
the supercomputer.
Server.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Incidentally, the largest supercomputer ever made, when you think about it, with one possible exception, is of course the Google system, which is all put together as though it were one computer.
Mm.
It will send you to a data center in France automatically if you need 100 servers that you can't get in your New York area computer. Mm-hmm. It will automatically move data across the world to have automatic backups. Google, when they started getting going, discovered nobody had ever written software for a computer as complicated as what they were doing. Distributed computing. Thousands and then hundreds of thousands of servers all put together. So they hired some of the best architects in the world out of Bell Labs and built their own software. Now, WALL-E had to be trained. What was done is the programmers fed in 100 million plus actual images, which had descriptions, captions. And from this, WALL-E discovered what a gangster looked like.
Okay, you're talking about the DALL-E computer now, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
okay. It discovered what taking a selfie looked like
Okay.
because it had thousands and thousands of pictures of taking a selfie.
Mm-hmm.
And what's doing, and what's the heart of the AI, is something that I remember talking about on the radio around 1982. It's doing inference. Instead of somebody figuring out the rules, making templates, putting together what's required, it goes out, looks at what's actually happened is in the world, and from that figures out what the patterns are. Which means, among other things, and in 1982 was an interesting concept, but we're close. And why AI is so important now is two things happened 10 and 15 years ago. One is that computers got so fast they could work with 100 million images or billions of lines of text, which is what it takes for the language models.
Mm-hmm.
And the other was Hinman and 3 or 4 other computer scientists came up with some ingenious new algorithms on how to do it. It spread worldwide. The US is still ahead, although a lot of the original work got done in Canada. And the Chinese are very close, and they're spending billions of government money supporting AI because they want to catch up and pass us because they see how powerful it is.
Dave, I want to get back to this DALL-E AI software and some of the stuff they can do because the things that we just mentioned are kind of comical. Let me see what a gangster, 1920s gangster taking a selfie would be, but there are other not so cutesy things that can happen with this kind of software. We could just tell it to create something out of the blue. And I'm just thinking disinformation, misinformation. What are your thoughts about where this could potentially go?
Well, it certainly has the ability to generate an amazing realistic video of, say, Tom Cruise with his mouth on the penis of the President of the United States. Neither of which do we have the original picture of. And obviously, this would be totally fake. It works. We've seen deep fakes taking, I, I don't think I actually watched any, but I certainly heard plenty of descriptions along the way, taking a porn film and putting the face of a famous actress in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to make it. In fact, I remember being in a speech or a presentation by a fellow university type who was working on the problem of figuring out whether something was real or deep fake. And it wasn't easy because whenever he found something that could tell them apart, the people doing the fakes changed their algorithms to solve that problem.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to tell whether it's Linda Lovelace or Renee Zellweger in some future videos. What that means and what that's going to happen with that, I don't have any more judgment than anybody in our audience, but I can tell you the technology works.
I mean, to me, that's kind of frightening. I mean, you could create fake news. You could create, scenarios where you see things happen that never happened. I mean, yeah, granted, we have movies today that do that, but this kind of takes that to a whole another level of reality.
This is much less computationally intensive. It doesn't need the big computer like this is being used by DALL-E. You can make a deep fake on a powerful home computer. It would take a while, but
Hmm.
you definitely could do it. And people are doing it right and left. Uh, and it's getting better and better. And if you want to get a picture of either Joe Biden or Donald Trump shaking hands and then giving a big hug to Vladimir Putin, it could be generated. And it can be generated so well that most people wouldn't be able to tell it wasn't real.
Mm.
That's the reality. That's just one of the things that we have to worry about with AI.
Hmm.
Let's go back to this rapper and let me explain where it could go all wrong and come out with a caricature that was offensive. Presumably, this was built in a similar pattern of going out and looking at a lot of images of Black singers. Probably it's not nearly as sophisticated as what DALL-E can do. It's not photorealistic. Uh, and it came up with something that clearly was a Black man singing. And, but it came up with what it found out there, going at pictures of Black singers. Wild hair coloring, and it didn't have enough judgment to say it wouldn't be green, probably. A nose ring that looked like the pictures that National Geographic would have used 50 years ago and would never print more. And a lot of offensive profanity in the lyrics, although I think those were written by human beings, not by that. You definitely can do music and lyrics fairly well using artificial intelligence. Again, the big machines with 30,000 and 100,000 servers. Uh, this is all what's happening. Now, what have you seen with artificial intelligence going wrong, Stu?
Yeah, I haven't actually seen it, but my imagination is kind of running a little wild here. It can make up stories. It sounds like the AI can actually write. It can create storylines. It can create images. It can create images out of the blue. That particular writer in the New York Times who wrote the story about DALL-E, he just made up stuff in his mind and said, render it, and the software just kind of created a picture out of, I was not out of thin air because that's not quite the case. You've explained how,
No, it's not thin air. It's
yeah,
very intense air, as I say. 100 million images, maybe more.
I just see false news. I see misinformation. I see the deep fakes. I see, it being difficult to tell who you're communicating with, whether you're talking to a real person or a bot. To me, it just kind of throws all of cyber communications and cyberspace into a real, just unpredictable kind of parameters where you just cannot trust what you're looking at, what you're hearing, or what you're reading. That's my fear.
And you can't predict for sure who's on the other side.
Hmm.
Alan Turing, the great computer scientist who was killed by British prejudice because he was gay and was taken into court and committed suicide.
Well, that's the guy that broke the Nazi code, right?
Yeah, he was the leader on the project that broke Enigma,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and he was incredibly original and brilliant. And one of the things he came up with was a Turing test. Put a computer in one room and have it communicate with a human in another room. So they can't, so the human can't see whether it's a human or a computer.
Mm-hmm.
If the human can't tell whether it's a human or a computer, that would imply the computer has to be intelligent. That is now totally disproven because there are computers that can produce a conversation that you wouldn't know was a computer. They're not intelligent by almost anybody's opinion. Rather, they're doing what we just described in AI. They're gathering an enormous number of examples and putting it together, and being like a parrot.
Mm-hmm.
What a parrot hears,
what about this Google engineer, Dave, that just got fired because he claimed that the AI had evolved to a point where it had sentient or human consciousness type of capability?
Almost everybody in the field disagrees with him. He was basically making the argument that it was so good at replicating a human, it must be intelligent. And his superiors at Google and every computer scientist in the world said, no, that doesn't prove an intelligence. Alan Turing was wrong. You can fake a human by being a brilliant parrot who started with literally billions of lines of text and conversations to figure out how to sound like a human. But there's a lot of people, in fact, a major debate for years in the computer science is when will our computers get so good that we have to think of them as a person.
Wow.
And there's some people who think that's going to happen by 2028. The majority of people in the field think it's 50 years or 100 years away.
Okay. Well, hold that thought, Dave. That is a very intriguing question. We've got to take a brief break and let folks know that you're listening to WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. You're listening to Clean Air Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid. We're going to take a brief musical break and be right back. Stay tuned.
Se você disser que eu desafino amor, saiba que isto em mim provoca imensa dor. Só privilegiados têm ouvido igual ao seu. Eu possuo apenas o que Deus me deu. Se você insiste em classificar meu comportamento diante musical, eu mesmo mentindo devo argumentar que isto é bossa nova, que isto é muito natural. O que você não sabe nem sequer pressente é que os desafinados também têm coração. Fotografei você na minha Rolleiflex. Revelou-se a sua enorme ingratidão. Só não poderá falar assim do meu amor. Ele é o maior que você pode encontrar, viu? Você com a sua música esqueceu o principal, que no peito dos desafinados, no fundo do peito bate calado. No peito dos desafinados também bate um coração.
Okay, we're back. Media and Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WHCR 90.3, The Voice of Harlem. Before the break, we were talking about AI and its gradual evolution or proposed evolution to the point where it may actually mimic human intelligence. Dave, what's the latest on that?
Some people, one person thinks it already did, and everybody's condemning him, and Google fired him. A surprising number of very serious people think it's going to happen soon, maybe within the next 10 years. And the majority of people who are in the field and understand the problem thinks it's further away, 50 or 100 years from now. If you're interested in this idea, there's a fabulous book by Kate Metz, a reporter, called Genius Makers: Mavericks Who Brought AI to Google, Facebook, and the world. What he did is he went to see the people at DeepMind who came up with AlphaGo and then the folding, the people who the professors who came up with the improved algorithms that were crucial to making it practical to do this, and literally dozens of the most advanced people in the field doing everything. And he's got lots of funny anecdotes. He's got how a professor talked Facebook into giving him the better part of 200 million for a company that was only 3 people at the time, but they wanted his algorithm. And it was worth it. I mean, the patent rights, if he patented it, would have been worth that much. And it's something you can understand without having the depth to know what is the algorithm diffusion that was talked about in the Times article.
What's the title of that book again?
Genius Makers by Kate Metz. And he spoke, he has about 2 chapters worth of interviews with the most advanced people in computer science and artificial intelligence, asking them that question. And he has several of them who think it's close, and the majority of others who say, no way. But the article that we're talking about with all the stuff from DALL-E and DeepMind in the Times was entitled, we have to think about artificial intelligence because it's now so good, changing things that matter to us, like whether I can read newspapers in Chinese, as I do a dozen times a day. And it's just going to get better. because we know computers are going to get bigger and faster, and an awful lot of brilliant people are trying to understand and improve the algorithms behind it.
Now that particular writer, Dave, he made some suggestions about what he thought we should do to kind of raise folks' awareness about AI. I think among them was he suggested that politicians get schooled on where this technology is going. They apparently they have no idea. I don't know that that's realistic, given their attention span and that they're focused on technology. But it sounds like a good idea. And secondly, another suggestion he had was that the technology companies do a better job of explaining where this stuff is going. I don't have a lot of faith in that. Maybe you do, Dave. I mean, they're so interested in selling the stuff and promoting the stuff. I don't know that they would really be able to kind of pitfall some of the things we should be looking for, some of the concerns that we have. What did you think about his recommendations? Does that make sense to you?
Well, I deal with politicians who have no idea what they're talking about and give out tens of billions of dollars every day.
Mm-hmm.
There is somewhere between $5 and $25 billion of unnecessary spending in the current infrastructure broadband stuff. And none of the people who allocated that money in Congress understood what was going on and where they were introducing waste. The people running the program, like Alan Davidson, a very intelligent lawyer, also are ignoring the waste they're producing. And this is a whole different thing that happens. This is confirmation bias. This is filtering out information that doesn't agree with what you believe. And the psychologists have been talking about it for 20 years. And did Donald Trump and his people prove that there's a lot of people who can believe utter and total nonsense?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not just right-wing Republicans. Some of the people I most respect in Washington fool themselves into believing. In fact, I've got an example, I think. Jessica Rosenworcel, I've known for many years. She's sharp as a whip, very dedicated civil servant, works all night when necessary.
Current chair of the FCC.
Absolutely the kind of person you'd want. And she's been saying for a few months that the ACP program has connected 13 million people to the internet by giving a $30 subsidy. What she doesn't say is that, no, probably it's connected fewer than 1 million people. And we had a show, we did this.
Mm-hmm.
We had two of the Washington, we had Scott Woolston on our show talking about this. The way they've rolled out that program, they haven't been able to get the benefits to the 15 million, 20 million people in the US who are currently unconnected. Almost all the money, probably something like 97%, has been going as a subsidy to relatively poor people who were connected already because they'd managed to find a way to cough up the money. Mm-hmm. Now, it's a good thing that people who are relatively poor, it's up to twice the poverty line to qualify, save $60 a month. That adds up to $600 a year. And for somebody who's living on a fixed income, that actually is enough to matter. So it's been a great income supplement program for the poor. It's been a great subsidy and giveaway to the companies that are selling it. But so far, it hasn't connected the people that everybody thought it was aimed at, the people who weren't connected to the internet. And I know that because we've done 6 shows about how we make that stuff work right. And
Interestingly, the FCC and NorCommerce are collecting data on who are the new customers that are connected under the ACP program. There's no data from what I've been able to see available on that. Have you heard it?
Well, I've actually been asking, and the Los Angeles Times has been asking the FCC for months for that data because we couldn't believe that they didn't manage to collect it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they say, we don't have any, we don't know that. And that's clearly deliberate ignorance. But the facts are fairly clear. People have looked at the demographics of who's getting the money where and so on. Very few unconnected were reached, despite spending billions of dollars.
So Dave, how do we connect that problem with the politicians understanding what's going on to the AI conversation that we're having?
Well, we start by being realistic. Almost everybody in politics is not a scientist or an engineer or a broadband expert. And why most of them, including everybody I've ever met at the FCC, are generally honorable and want to do a good job, they don't have the time, energy, or background to understand the technologies that they're working with. And I can give you dozens of examples from the FCC, top people, many of whom I respect greatly, who just didn't realize what was going on. In fact, I'll give you another example right now. They're talking about using fixed wireless to reach people in the most remote areas because fixed wireless is cheaper. Is it? Well, there's a lot of evidence that when you have a wireless network in place, adding enough bandwidth to serve some people wirelessly, as 2 million Americans are now being served by T-Mobile and Verizon, works fine because it's very inexpensive once you have a network built to give it more bandwidth. You have to have fiber backhaul and so on. We have that in most of the country. But if you have to build out towers and fiber to places where there are none, because there's so few people that the commercial guys thought it was impossible, it's not clear that fixed wireless is impossible. And I was on a session with some of the EU folks who are talking about spending billions building out fixed wireless because it's a less expensive way to get people broadband. And that's true, except for the places where people don't have broadband. And this was a guy whose job was giving out billions of dollars of subsidies. And also the head of the European Regulators Association, who is the Greek regulator in charge, explaining the advantages of fixed wireless and how much they thought they were going to save based on data from locations that are fairly dense and already have wireless towers and backhaul. There is no data that anybody has that I can find, and I've been asking a lot of people about what it costs to do fixed wireless in locations that are not served because there are very few people there and or they have terrible geography. So what I'm saying here is that while you want to do everything you can to get the knowledge to the people who are making the important decisions, it's very hard for them to hear it and to learn it. Yeah. With, I suspect, one interesting exception, who just got reelected to Congress last night. My old roommate, Jerry Nadler, won in a landslide in his primary, going back to Congress. And he was a science geek, and he still is a science geek. And in fact, if he hadn't decided he wanted to become president and change the world, he today would be a scientist. And in fact, the last time I had a chance to talk to him, which is now decades ago, we were talking about advances in science that were impressing him. Because he really cares and wants to know. But that's very much the exception.
Yeah. And I guess
unfortunately.
I guess one of the issues also, Dave, is that the people that are doing the educating and the explaining to the politicians have their own agendas, which are not necessarily solving the problems as much as it is them getting funding to promulgate their particular solutions, their particular approach. So you've got the incumbents, for instance, that are busy explaining to the federal regulators what needs to happen to solve the digital divide. And of course, they end up getting paid to do that. The very guys that created the digital divide are proposing the solutions to solve it. And the FCC and others are not hearing other voices.
Absolutely. And I've been doing telecom for 20 years. I used to go down to Washington a lot, and I got to know many of the people who were making decisions. When Obama got elected, I literally had something like 8 people on my Facebook friend list who got positions in the administration.
Wow.
Yeah, there weren't that many progressives in this field because this field in Washington is dominated by people being paid by the big companies,
Right.
the lobbyists. And there are 10 lobbyists for every honest public advocate in Washington. And they are very, very good at persuading people.
Mm-hmm.
They're paid as much as $18 million a year, which was David Cohn was paid by Comcast and made it into financial finding. Jim Ciccone of AT&T was one of the most effective. And a newspaper story said he was making $9 million a year. And I asked him, and he said, not quite that much. And the going rate for any staffer who wants to go and become a lawyer in Washington was over $1 million 6 years ago, when a staffer who didn't like working at the FCC, he had worked for Ed Markey for a long time, decided he wanted to go private, and he got the offers. Mm-hmm. And he had several offers over $1 million back then. Mm-hmm. And the lawyers who were successful and become partners, the going rate is $3 to $5 million in Washington. Yeah. Yeah. For that kind of money, you get damn good persuaders.
Yeah, yeah. You heard me talk and kind of whine a bit, Dave, about how excited I was and the folks that I worked with when Obama came in, progressive guy, and proposed a $3 billion program twice, once in his first administration and again in his second administration, the BTOP, Broadband Technology Opportunity Program. And again, they were looking to solve the digital divide and bring connectivity to the underserved back then. But who got the money? All the money went to the same guys that helped create the problem. There were no new operators, no innovation in the way that they spent that money.
And it's even worse than that, beside the fact that a lot of it was given out through ordinary old political corruption. I happen to know the people in charge of that. I worked on the broadband plan and was going down to Washington a lot in those days. And reporters get to talk to everybody. That's one of the few benefits of the field. We certainly don't make a lot of money in general. So I knew both Larry Strickland and Jonathan Adelson, who were in charge. Mm-hmm. They are, again, models of smart, honorable, hardworking people who want to do the right thing, have plenty of experience, and got it all wrong. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars on adoption programs to persuade people to connect, because some AT&T paid folks previously had said, we have to work on both the supply and the demand, and you have to do something about the demand. The evidence was overwhelming that it didn't work the way they were doing it. A politician in California would go on a radio show with somebody from a community group and tell people why they should have broadband and why it would change their life. Now, the first thing is that generally a lie. Broadband almost never changes people's lives, although there's some cases where it could give you medical information that could save your life. But most people are there to get a date and keep up with their friends. And a surprising number of people are using that as their only source of news. So we looked back where the spending was going, and there was no interesting increase in the number of people connecting, despite hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're doing it again. And one of the things that really got me mad is when Davidson, who's running the program, said, we had a very successful adoption program back in the broadband stimulus. Utter and total nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't be surprised if Larry Strickling had told him that, yes, we had all these great programs for adoption that you should consider. Because Larry Strickling is like almost all human beings. It's very, very hard for them to hear information that proves they're wrong. And it's very, very hard for them to give up an opinion that's important to them.
Yeah, back to your confirmation bias. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember asking Jonathan Lichtenstein, who ran part of the program, how many unserved people did he reach? This was like 2 years into the program. There was a lot of money had been spent. And he said, I don't know. Let me get a number for you. And he went to his people and asked, how many unserved people? Well, it turns out that most of what was going on was projects like the one I worked on in Vermont that was bringing fiber where everybody could already get cable. And was building wireless in a few places that didn't have decent wireless, but it added up to almost no unserved people signing up. So much that he said, I really can't give you a number because it was so low, I don't think he believed it.
Yeah.
And he never went back. And that's part of persuasion. The psychologists have taught us that, and I see it every day, reporting on the people making actual decisions about technology in Washington and in Brussels. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that's true in AI, although I'm not an expert in that field.
Well, we're about running out of time here, Dave, but I'm reminded of an expression of my uncle who's passed now, Uncle Brenton. One of his favorite expressions was when he'll see these patterns coming around and around and around, ain't nothing changed but the date. Otherwise, it's the same old, same old. So, let's hope that maybe some innovative folks such as yourself and some of the folks that I'm working with might have a chance to make a change in the landscape out there, at least in the broadband area. I don't know about AI. To me, that is really the wild, wild west of technology. We've got to keep our eye on that and see where it goes.
Well, we have an example where it's getting better. We did a show based on something that was very well publicized, that things like Amazon's facial recognition, which was being used by cops to arrest people, was not wildly, but seriously inaccurate with people with darker faces. And that had been known and been proven, and the academics had gone in and did the testing. And the people who actually make that software and do the facial recognition said, we have a problem. And they went back, and over the last few years, facial recognition has gotten much better with dark complexion people. It's still not perfect, but that's the kind of bias that shows up in artificial intelligence all the time.
Yeah.
And has to be, and now, excuse me, if you read the stuff by the people who are actually doing the work, They're very aware of that kind of problem and they try to avoid it, and it's not always easy.
Okay, well, I guess the lesson there is we got to keep our eyes open and keep advocating. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
well, thanks, Dave. This has been Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Dave, any final words before we sign off?
Well, do we live in a democracy or plutocracy controlled by the people with money? We had 2 races in New York that suggested we're not the kind of democracy we think of. Dan Goldman put $4 million of his own money into his campaign. He won by a very narrow margin, so much that some of the papers are refusing to call him the winner. Something that was even more frightening upstate. Paul Palladino, who ran for governor a while back, is publicly admired, not just Donald Trump, but Adolf Hitler. And he made hundreds of millions of dollars. I think he ran paychecks, and he put millions of dollars into his race. Fortunately, he lost by 52 to 48.
Okay.
But he would have been laughed out of the district if he didn't have millions of dollars to spend on his campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Are we a democracy in which people have that kind of access? The listener can decide that as well as I can.
Yeah. Stay tuned. Okay. Thanks, Dave. Dave Burstein, Stu Reid, Community and Technology, WHCR 90.3, every Wednesday at 5 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.